to meeting number 22 of the Special Committee on Canada-China Relations, pursuant to order of reference of Wednesday, September 23, 2020. The committee is meeting on its study of Canada-China relations. Il s'agit d'une réunion hybride adoptée par la Chambre le 20.
This is a hybrid meeting, given the motion adopted by the House on the 5th of January 2021.
Defense, thank you for being here. We also have from the Department of National Defense, Jody Thomas, Deputy Minister, Rear Admiral Scott Bishop, Commander of the Canadian Forces Intelligence Command and Chief of Defense Intelligence, Major General Cadieux, Director of Staff, Strategic Joint Staff. And finally, from the Communications Security Establishment, we have Shelley Bruce, Chief, as well as Scott Jones, Head of the Canadian Centre for Cyber Security. Merci à tous d'être ici ce soir.
Thank you for being here this evening.
To people tie. Many Canadians have Chinese roots, and many Canadians frequently travel to the mainland of China before the pandemic to visit families and friends. Now, despite these ties, our bilateral relationship is complex and presents challenges. In our defense policy, Strong, Secure, and Engage, we committed to being a reliable partner in the Asia-Pacific region through strong partnerships and consistent engagements. The world is changing rapidly, as is China's geopolitical role. That is why we are constantly assessing our approach to China. Any behaviors and activities that run counter to Canadian values and interests, and those of our allies and partners, require us to look at the relationship with eyes wide open. And we are doing that. Mr. Chair, here and around the world, we are adamant about supporting the rules-based international order. We will always work to uphold it and the stability that it brings. We believe that all countries benefit when we observe the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. We will always stand up for freedom of navigation and overflight while respecting the rights and jurisdiction of coastal states. We know that freedom of navigation is vital. 90% of the world's trade travels by sea. That's why Canada opposes land reclamation projects and building outposts in disputed areas for military purposes. What we do support is lawful commerce, freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight in accordance with international law. And we will continue supporting our allies and partners in the Asia-Pacific region, especially in the face of unilateral actions that undermine peace and stability. One way that we signal this support is by maintaining an active naval presence in the region. At the moment, HMCS Calgary is deployed in the Indo-Pacific region with a Cyclone helicopter on board to carry out Canada's forward presence activities under Operation Projection. Now, shortly, the ship will be chopped into Operation Artemis, which is Canadian Forces' mission to fight terrorism and to make the Middle East waters more secure. Under Operation Neon, we are also contributing to multinational efforts to implement United Nations Security Council sanctions against North Korea, sanctions that China has also agreed to uphold. Along with these naval activities, Canada has been a proud dialogue partner with ASEAN for 4 decades. ASEAN is the key group of nations in Southeast Asia working to uphold the rules-based order. Canada is also seeking to deepen our level of engagement with ASEAN by pursuing member status on 2 expert defense ministers meeting plus on maritime security and humanitarian and disaster relief. And as said during a December ADMM Plus meeting, Canada is looking to expand our Navy, Air Force, Army, and Special Forces ties with ASEAN countries through high-level bilateral engagements, staff talks, and participation in military exercises. And we will keep prioritizing exchanges with ASEAN members in military education, including through military training and cooperation program. So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Canada's relationship with an evolving China is complex and a challenging one. In all of our dealings with China, we will continue to be guided by our values, defend human rights, and protect our interests at home and abroad. And we will always work with like-minded countries to uphold the rules-based international order that brings stability and security to Asia-Pacific region and beyond. I want to thank the committee for its time today. I would be glad to respond to any questions. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll now go to our first round of questions. Mr. Bazan, welcome to the committee. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Minister, as we know in the last couple of days, there's been some reporting that the Trudeau government threatened to pull funding from the Halifax Security Forum if it gave the John McCain Award to President of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen. Do you support that decision, and why aren't you supporting President Tsai Ing-wen for this award?
Well, Mr. Chair, first of all, that's actually absolutely false. The Halifax International Security Forum is an independent organization, and they make their own choices with regards to the awards.
So are you supporting receiving this award?
Mr. Chair, as I stated, when it comes to this award, they're an independent organization, and they decide
if you personally support it, Minister.
Mr. Chair, when it comes to our relationship with China, I'm happy to take many questions. You asked me a question regarding
that's fine.
The Halifax International Security Forums and the decision how they make. It's an independent organization, and they make a decision accordingly by themselves.
Did you threaten to withhold funding from the Halifax Security Forum, which receives funding from the Department of National Defense, if they awarded the McCain Award to the President of Taiwan?
Mr. Chair, no. In fact, actually, we've awarded authorized funding for the Halifax International Security Forum twice last year. Once, I believe, was in, sometime early September, and the other one was in November last year.
So will that go forward with the Halifax Security Forum providing this award to President Tsai Ing-wen of Taiwan?
Mr. Chair, I'm not understanding the question that the member asked.
All the reporting is that the government of Canada, the Liberal government, is going to withhold this funding if this award is presented to President Tsai Ing-wen.
Mr. Chair, when it comes to the International Security Forum, we have supported this forum since the time that we came in government. It was actually in place before. And as I stated, it is not our decision to award this. It is the decision by the forum itself and the organization to make that decision on their own.
Okay, we'll probably return back to that, Mr. Chair. I want to get on with questions about the Chinese troops that were training in Canada back in February of 2018. So troops from the People's Liberation Army took part in winter warfare training exercises at CFB Petawawa. How many Chinese troops were present for that exercise?
Mr. Chair, we want to make it very clear when it came to our relationships with China and how our military relationship works. We work very closely with our allies and how relationships are done. And in fact, the only formal relationship that we actually had with the Chinese military was actually an agreement that was signed by Minister Rob Nicholson at that time. And then since we have gone, because the situation, Mr. Chair, I'm trying to answer the question, because the situation has changed, as allies, we have made assessments. And actually beforehand, their participation in RIMPAC was not allowed. And then once,
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Chairman, if you allow me to answer the question,
I'd just like to get to the questions here.
Mr. Chair, I'm trying to.
Well, the reality is, Minister, is that there was no Chinese troops ever trained in Canada when the Conservatives were in government. This was a new addition to the agreement that was made by the Trudeau government. So again, how many troops were present during that exercise in February of 2018? That's the question. Can you please answer that?
I'm trying to, Mr. Chair, if the member would allow me to answer the question. After our two Michaels were arrested, very clear direction was given that we were not to continue with any type of military involvement, even though we had Minister Nicholson had signed that. And then I can provide greater detail of any involvement and future involvement by Major General Kedu, if you like.
How many troops and what were their ranks that were from the PLA?
General Kedu, can you answer that question?
Mr. Chair, for the exercise that Mr. Bazan is referring to in February 2018, there were 5 members of the PLA that were present as observers. They ranged in ranks from the lowest rank was a sergeant, the highest rank was a major general, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, we know from documents accidentally released by Global Affairs Canada that the decision by the CDS to cancel the winter training exercise with the Chinese troops only happened after our Five Eye partners warned us there could be a dangerous sharing of military information and sensitive doctrine if it went ahead a second time in 2019. So, Minister, were you prepared to go ahead with this exercise up to that point because Global Affairs Canada and the Minister of Foreign Affairs told you to, or did you allow the military itself to actually make the decision to cancel it?
No, Mr. Chair, as I stated in my earlier testimony, were arrested, I gave direction that we were not to have any further involvement when it comes to the training. And that's exactly what we have done. The training that was there was actually a direct result of the decision and the agreement that was made under Minister Rob Nicholson under the members' government. So when the member says that under their time when they were in government, it wasn't that they had no involvement, this was us reversing that decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Bazan. Et maintenant, Mr. Lightbound.
And now, Mr. Lightbound, you have 6 minutes, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Minister, for joining us here this evening for this meeting. I would like to hear you a committee has made public a report regarding the importance of cyber attacks carried out by foreign actors. This information is based on some CSE reports about 2 major actors, Russia and China. I would like to hear what is being done to ensure that our networks are as well protected as possible, especially in the context of so much work from home, exposing more vulnerability that might not have been the case in the past. So what's being done to protect our infrastructures and our cybersecurity and our systems?
For the question, we do have a significant concern when it comes to our cyber actors around the world, and especially when it comes to Russia and China. Our agency, especially the Communication Security Establishment, has tremendous capability, and we now actually have the authorities to take the appropriate actions. Before the Communication Security Act was in place when we came into government, we actually had the capability but didn't have the authority to do so. For example, we had to wait for actually a cyber attack to occur, the equivalent of waiting to actually get punched in the face before you can actually take any actions, even though you knew that an attack was occurring. So one of the things that we did here was within the new CSE Act is when you see an attack coming, we have now the authority to be able to take further action to be able to shut it down. In addition to, we also have the ability as a government to take offensive action. Now, Putting the authorities in place is one thing, but we also have now made the significant investments by creating the cyber center as well under CSE to making sure that we concentrate all our support there. So that's one aspect of it. So making the appropriate investments there. So it's about having the right people, maintaining that capability, making sure you have the right authorities, but also investing in the right capabilities is to be able to round it off to making sure that Canada is safe from cyber attacks.
Puis sur cet enjeu-là spécifiquement,
Specifically on this issue, how important is it to be working with our Five Eye partners? How is the multilateral approach supporting the anti-cyber attack approach?
Mr. Chair, our relationship in the Five Eyes, especially when it comes to CSE and its equivalent agencies, is extremely strong. This is built over time. CSE in Canada, we have an extremely good relationship because of the capability that we provide and the responsibilities that we share. But now our credibility has significantly increased because we actually have our authorities in line with our allies. And that was very important. But the main thing is, for us, is to continue to invest in the capability so that we stay at the cutting edge. So we have a very good position now, but we need to continue to make those investments just like we are doing right now so that we stay on that path. Investing in capabilities through our people are the number one priority to making sure that we actually have the abilities to remain safe.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Peut-être
Thank you, Minister. In the Arctic, we know that China has been described as being a near Arctic nation as of 2018. Can you tell us about our defense approach in the Arctic?
As in our defense policy, we looked at the Arctic and sovereignty and put it in our defense policy the importance of maintaining our sovereignty. It was going to take investments. First of all, we already started with the investments. For example, making sure we have the Arctic offshore patrol ships. In fact, we have the first one that was actually operating in the region, conducting its test, and we're going to have 6 now, not just 5. Well, we will have 15 surface combatants as well, and through a fully funded defense policy. But NORAD modernization and continental defense was the last pillar. We have outlined in our defense policy, and now we are moving forward with this. And the reason we had to do it because we have to work in conjunction with the U.S. on this. And we want to make sure that we do the proper costing and put the funding to it. So this way, no government can come in and start cutting funding. So just like we secure funding policy, we're going to do the same thing for the Arctic. We want to make sure also, though, that the people up in the north get the appropriate support as we make further defense investments up there.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Moi, ça conclut. Je pense qu'il me...
Thank you, Chair. I think that's the end of my questions. I believe I have only 30 seconds left, so not enough time to put another question. Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Lightbound. And now we will turn to Mr. Bergeron, who has 6 minutes, sir. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Minister, for being with us here this evening. It's highly appreciated, really. Perhaps I'll pick up on the question that was put by Mr. Lightbound regarding the Arctic. We know that China is taking a greater and greater interest in the Arctic, despite the fact that China does not actually own any land base, either to the North Pole or to the South Pole. There is interest on China's part. We know that the Chinese have tried to take over a mine in the Northwest Territories, for example. Luckily, well, I'm not sure if it's luckily, but anyway, it certainly is a good thing that we didn't allow this purchase. Let me go back to the importance of defending our Arctic territory and sovereignty. Canadian sovereignty in the Arctic isn't actually fully recognized by our main ally, the United States. That being the case, how do we intend to manage China's approach, Russia's approach as well, in Arctic matters and their policy, given that our sovereignty in our own Arctic region is already not fully supported by the United States, and our military capacities are certainly far under those that the United States would like us to have, or NATO would like us to have as well.
First of all, that's a really important question that you asked when it comes to protecting the Arctic. We can't just look at strictly from a defense nexus when it looks to our sovereignty. We need to always look at a whole of government approach to making sure that we're preventing access to various industries is extremely important, making sure that we make the right investments. But when it comes to the state of where we're at, when we work with the U.S., we probably couldn't be in a better position than any other nation across the country with the U.S. because of our treaty through NORAD. NORAD is the only binational command in the world where you have a U.S. commander who is selected obviously by the U.S., but has to be authorized, also approved by the Prime Minister. Just like the Deputy Commander, who is always Canadian, has to be authorized by the President. So through this, we manage the security of aerospace. And what we're trying to do now, what we will be doing, is looking at modernizing NORAD and take things to a whole new level. And this is not just strictly about technology investments. This is about looking at what new things that we need to put in as part of this relationship. How do we look at possibly at maritime? We need to be mindful that the Arctic originally was looking at from aerospace. We want to go from space all the way to underwater. Significant work is currently being done in the research development world right now, in a classified sense, to making sure we figure that piece out. And plus how we link it into the procurement piece with our new ships that are coming online. And then it's linked into the command relationship we have ongoing. So that's what NORAD modernization or continental defense will look like. And once we have that, we need to make sure that we send a very strong message of deterrence. But when it comes to some of the other maybe disagreements that we have with the U.S., we have a very good relationship with the U.S. to be able to work things out. And we have to always be mindful that our relationship with the U.S. is it can't be close to be compared to how we work with China.
Tout à fait d'accord avec vous, Monsieur le Ministre, mais
I fully agree with you, Minister. But comparing the relationships between Canada and the United States and Canada and the People's Republic of China, well, certainly shows that a good deal of investment is being made by the People's Republic of China in defense, its own defense policies. It's the second largest budget for defense in the world at present. China is now an entity of concern even for NATO, even though the concern is for areas far from the Northern Atlantic. So NATO and the United States are concerned by or worried about Canada's level of investment in its own defense. So how are we going to respond to these concerns given China's and Russia's view to influencing Northern policy?
So first of all, Mr. Chair, when it comes to China's investments into defense, we do have concerns with that as well. How we work with NATO, this is where, Mr. Chair, I do have, I'll clarify the relationship. Yes, there was a significant concern when it came to defense investments. This is why we conducted a very policy review. And then once we launched our defense policy, demonstrated in addition to what the previous government was going to add into defense, we added a $63 billion. But more importantly, Mr. Chair, probably the most important thing when it came to our defense policy was we just didn't put the policy out. We actually added the money to it. So for the 20 years of the defense policy, it's carved out of the fiscal framework. So then now defense doesn't have to worry about the money, the 338 projects that are there. And we're going to be doing the same thing for NORAD modernization. So when it comes to the level of investments, actually, both NATO and the U.S. are very happy with the level of investments that we're making. Obviously, we have more work to do. That's where NORAD modernization comes in. As I've always said at NATO and spoken to the NATO Secretary General many times about this, as we look at supporting NATO in Europe, and
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Minister. Sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Bergeron's time is up. C'est le fin for Mr. Bergeron. And now we'll go to Mr. Harris for 6 minutes. Mr. Harris, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for joining us. There's lots of interesting questions arising out of your visit. First of all, I have a concern about the whole issue of security in Canada, and that's what we're talking about here, and in particular cybersecurity. We do know that China and other countries, including Russia and perhaps Canada, have capabilities in the cyber warfare, I guess it's called sometimes, but capability of doing cyber attacks. We have recently electricity turned off in India, allegedly by Chinese state or non-state actors. We have of course, the history of interference with the Iranian centrifuges, which occurred historically, I think, in 2010 or 2014, and allegedly recently. I have a question for you. I know the security part for this, but can you tell us how vulnerable Canada's key infrastructure might be to interferences of this sort? I know hydro dams are very important. There's a lot of the internet is very important. Communication is very important. What capabilities does Canada have to protect itself from these kinds of vulnerabilities?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. And it's a very important one. At the end of the day, when it comes to our cybersecurity, we need to make sure that we protect our valuable assets and our industry. This is why through the Communications Security Act, we have the authorities available to be able to engage with industries so that we can work with them to provide, making sure that they have the right cyber capabilities. In fact, the Cyber Center works very closely with the various sectors, and more importantly, actually with almost any company that wishes to get additional information. What we want to do is, as we look at not only the sectors, we want to make Canada cyber secure. And the only way to do this is to making sure that as companies develop, as industries develop, as sectors further develop as well, is to making sure that they have the right cyber capabilities from the get-go, advised by the Cyber Center. So currently, yes, I'm very confident with the capabilities that we have, but it's an ongoing support that we need to provide. And I'm happy to have our Chief Shelley Bruce provide greater information.
We may ask more questions of the individuals from CSE afterwards. I'm interested in your views on this. You're talking about providing information. Is that the strategy, to provide information, or do you have an actual capability of ensuring that people's vulnerabilities are able to be made secure? That's saying that companies who are interested, clearly Canada has a strategic interest in ensuring that the infrastructure is operating and is not subject to vulnerabilities. Have you looked at ways of ensuring that happens other than providing information?
No, absolutely. In fact, actually, there is a lot of work that actually is done in providing not just the information, but when it comes to the infrastructure that is needed to making sure that you actually are cyber safe. There is very close collaboration with CSE, with those sectors, but also there are certain things obviously we can't talk about in this forum, making sure that we don't provide it, but I'm sure our chief can provide greater information at the next session.
You have also, you mentioned the CSE Act giving you the authority to do that, but the CSE Act also allows CSE to covertly undertake active cybersecurity operations intended to influence public perception, for example, of the Chinese government. You could do it by hacking into the country's information structure and distributing sensitive, embarrassing documents about activities called hack and dumps or hack and leaks. Now, if Canada has authorized to do that, you can be sure that China or other countries are authorized to do that. Is CSE the organization that's responsible for defending against that kind of attack from other countries, like, for example, China? And are there any examples of attacks that have been detected or deflected as a result of CSE's activity?
First of all, CSC is responsible for protecting Canada when it comes to these type of attacks, and they do a very good job. And I'm very impressed. And more importantly, I just want to give a shout out to the individuals. It is because of the people that we have that we actually have this capability. And the reason I say this, because I hear this from from the allies as well, but it's also extremely important, Mr. Chair, for all members of this committee. With the CSC Act, yes, we do have more authorities, and it's very important with these additional authorities that we have. Is that we have a very strong deterrence as well. But anything that we do, just like when it comes to the military, is all based on Canadian law and also international law as well. And we want to do things in a manner that makes sure that Canadians stay safe. But at the same time, we send a strong message to any adversary that may be willing that we do have the capabilities to protect ourselves, and we want to send a strong message of deterrence.
Can you tell us what capabilities Canada may have in protecting Canadians by performing a counterattack or defenses or defensive responses in the case of a hybrid-style aggression against Canada involving an information or an infrastructure attack against Canada?
Mr. Harris, I'm afraid we'll have to wait for that answer as your time has concluded. Perhaps it will come up again, and you'll have another opportunity, of course. Et maintenant, on continue au 12e tour.
And now we'll go on to the second round with Mr. Poilus. You have 5 minutes, sir. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Minister. You mentioned in your opening remarks the efforts that Canada is making abroad to support a number of countries, but what about here? From the outset, we've heard a good deal about Chinese involvement in the land of Canada. In 2015, we identified the far north and as a new strategic area for China. The Pentagon put out a report to the effect that China was mapping Arctic submarine areas. So what do you think of their presence there?
I'm going to assure the member when it comes to China or any other nation that works up in the north that we take our sovereignty very seriously. We closely monitor activities, and we have a very strong presence in the area when it's needed as well. Obviously, I can't get into more details than this.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Minister. When it comes to our presence in the Arctic, we do know that we have a problem there. We don't have any polar icebreakers at present. I know that this isn't directly your responsibility, but as the Minister of Defense, are you putting pressure on our government to ensure that we do get polar icebreakers? Right now, I imagine that we're depending on our American colleagues for this because the Chinese are making some lovely ones right now, as far as I understand. So are you putting pressure on the government to solve this problem?
Mr. Chair, as we stated earlier on, this is a whole of government approach. In fact, actually, we work together to making sure that we have all the right support. So, for example, just on the defense side alone, as the member knows, at the time when he was a critic for defense, when it comes to our Arctic Officer patrol ships, we actually have the Harry DeWolf that actually is operating. Was operating up in the north conducting its trial. So we do have a presence there. We actually have now put up additional satellites so that we have a greater reconnaissance and outlook up there. We're doing some really cutting edge research up in the north as well. Plus, when it comes to the Coast Guard, we have made significant investments, and we will be doing more to making sure that we not only have the right presence, but we will provide the right support. But we need to make sure that we have that layered approach. It is extremely vital. But Mr. Chair, it's probably the most important piece. The investments that we're making into the future right now is about aligning all our space capabilities all the way down to underwater as well into a command and control structure that'll work with NORAD modernization.
Merci pour la réponse. Thank you. Vous savez que le temps est court.
You know that will shortly be out of time. So when it comes to telecommunications, we have a telecommunications issue with the Huawei group. Everyone's aware of it, the 5G problem and other problems with Huawei. But if I'm not mistaken, we were told that a telecommunications line has been installed by Huawei in northern Canada, and that Huawei intends to work with Indigenous peoples to provide communication channels to them. We know very well that this is just a good way for them to get their feet on the ground. Can you confirm whether Huawei has set up telecommunications in the far north or are doing it now, and not just 5G? I just mean any telecommunications.
Well, first of all, I can't provide any details about exactly what the member is just talking about in the north, but what I can say is when it comes to CSC and the work that they do, and it comes to our current infrastructure that we have in place, it is one of the best in the Five Eyes because of the decisions that our government and previous governments have made in this realm. And what this has allowed us to do is to have a good system as we work with telecommunication companies. And moving forward, this is exactly what we need to do, is making sure in the 5G world that it is just as robust, or if not better. And moving forward, this is not just about looking at one particular company. We need to be mindful that we're looking extremely broad because we're making decisions for way into the future. Okay. And so we want to make sure we have the right one, just like we did with 4G technology.
Merci. Dernière question, la Chine.
Thank you. My last question. China has become an observer in the Arctic Council as of 2013. Will Canada oppose a request made by China to get a superior status in the Arctic Council because they've become more intensely present in the Arctic?
Mr. Chair, obviously I can't talk about what discussions may occur. But one thing I can assure you when it comes to our government, especially from defense, that we will be extremely mindful when it comes to our Arctic sovereignty. It's something that we take very seriously, and we'll be aggressively making sure that we send a message. One message that we sent is that we actually have increased our Arctic zone when it comes to the north, and that we monitor with NORAD.
Thank you, Minister. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Paulus. And now,
Thank you, Mr. Paulus. And now, Ms. Zan.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to say thank you and welcome to the Minister. Shukriya ji. Minister, as we know, climate change is real. And in fact, it's a real danger in the world. And Canada is recognized as a strong ally globally in terms of disaster response and humanitarian assistance. And in that regard, first of all, I would very much like to thank you as an Australian-born Canadian for your direction to send help to Australia last year during the terrible, disastrous wildfires. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for that. Can you please tell us about the work of the Disaster Assistance Response Team and their operations on deployments around the world? Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I'm happy to talk about our DART and all the work that we have been doing in the Asia-Pacific and Indo-Pacific region. Climate impacts that region, and those nations know it extremely well. When they see sea levels rising, they're not just their livelihood, their entire existence is at stake. And what we did back in 2015 is increased our presence in the Pacific, having a greater presence there with the Canadian Armed Forces, especially our Navy, gave greater confidence to those nations that we would be there for them. So our DART plays a very important role when it comes to disasters. We do an analysis of when the team needs to be sent. It has to be requested. And then when it is sent, they provide the necessary humanitarian support. Great work. And this is one area that we have been trying to expand with our colleagues, especially working with Japan and South Korea in the region, and looking at how can we partner up with other nations, and especially Australia as well, and how we can work together to provide greater support. So, sometimes it's about airlift, and we've done that in other places. So plus, let's not also forget, we actually have the heavy urban search and rescue teams that our government actually restarted the funding for. And these teams are actually designed to respond to disasters. And so we're looking at various options on how we can provide greater support. But through those discussions, we'll have a better idea. But this is something, one area that we are paying very close attention to.
Thank you very much. And my constituents will be glad to hear that too, because here in Cumberland Colchester, we also are at threat of rising sea levels with the Chignecto Isthmus, which is surrounded by water on both sides. And Nova Scotia does not want to become an island. Minister, Canada is involved with our allies on a number of multilateral operations. And with the current environment, that allied work, solidarity, if you will, has proven to be really essential. So could you please expand a little bit more on our efforts with our allies to maintain peace and security in the Indo-Pacific region?
No, absolutely, Mr. Chair. And as I stated earlier, For some time, we have been working with our allies, but early on, when I went to the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, it was noted that we did not have a consistent engagement. So, which also meant when we showed up, we weren't taken seriously. So after my first meetings there, I committed to that the Canada will have a consistent engagement in the Pacific, and that's exactly what we've done. And you've seen the tremendous work. We're actually part of Operation Neon when it comes to sanctions monitoring against North Korea. We conduct exercises together with other militaries. That goes to how we can actually respond to nations when they put up their hand for a time of need when it comes to disasters. We provide capacity building training for many nations. And many nations in the Asian and the Pacific are part of our military training cooperation program, where they come to Canada and we provide additional language training. So these are the relationships that are currently being built. They're one to in not only enhancing those relationships, but developing further ones as well.
Thank you. And I'd just like to say at some point after the pandemic, we'd like to welcome you here to Pugwash, Nova Scotia, which is well known around the world for peace and for bringing people together to discuss how we can move further along with world peace and working together multilaterally with all countries. Thank you very much, Minister.
Since I have 15 seconds, I want to tell you that Cyrus Eaton, who started the Pugwash Thinkers Conferences, was once asked somewhere, where is Pugwash? He said, well, that's easy. It's halfway between Shinnemakas and Tatamagouche.
And he was right.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Zan. Monsieur Bergeron, pendant 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Mr. Bergeron, you have 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Therefore, I will try to be brief, Chair. Let me go back to the question that was put by Mr. Bazan at the outset. To better learn what has led the Minister of Defense to accept a joint exercise with the People's Republic of China on Canadian soil, and what are the reasons for which the Minister of Foreign Affairs, from what you have heard, wanted to keep that exercise going?
Let me make it very clear, Mr. Chair, that it wasn't the Minister of Foreign Affairs. We never actually had any discussion about this. I mean, I can't talk about whatever internal discussions that might happen at the lower levels of global affairs, but one thing I can tell you when it came to defense, this exercise, I wasn't aware that it was actually taking place. It was based on the agreements that were done, as I stated, signed by the previous government, and that work was continuing. Obviously, after our two Michaels were arbitrarily detained, I gave direction that we were not to continue with any type of further relationship, and that's exactly what we have right now. So when it comes to the relationship with China, we work very closely with our allies in how we make decisions based on the work. So whether it's originally it was about humanitarian and disaster response that we could work together, made at the exercise that we conduct at RIMPAC. It's one of the largest naval exercises that China would not be invited to that. So what we do is actually we work very closely within our Five Eyes partners on what type of relationships we build, because ultimately it's only through multilateralism that you're actually able to have the biggest impact.
Est-ce qu'il me reste du temps, Monsieur le Président?
Do I still have any time, Chair? I'm sorry, we're not hearing you. We can't hear you. 36 seconds. 36 seconds. Very well then. Quickly, Minister. I'm sure you won't have enough time to give me a full response, but I've been worrying and I've been concerned about the ways that we could ensure that we could discipline, if I can use that word, the People's Republic of China in its space policy efforts. A number of incidents have occurred. I won't get into them, but they lead us to think that there isn't enough consideration on China's part about the impacts that they might have in space. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. I'm so sorry to have been on mute for a moment.
Harris for 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Chair. I'll repeat my question from the last time, Minister. What capabilities does Canada have in potential counterattack or defensive response to a hybrid-style aggression involving a cyber attack on Canadian infrastructure or communications?
Well, Mr. Chair, we do have obviously a number of capabilities. Obviously, there are some capabilities we do not discuss in public. I'll hand it off to Shelley in a second here to discuss what we can talk about. But what I will say is the authorities that we have put into place does allow communication security establishment to be able to prevent attacks. Because if you remember...
I understand you have the authority. Capability is the concern, sir. Because, you know, we understand that other countries have capability of putting these kinds of attacks in place. So the question is, what does Canada have an ability to respond to these attacks, or we just simply have a defensive posture?
No, we do have the ability to do offensive cyber action as well. It's within the authorities that have been authorized under the CSC Act. But when it comes to the defensive side, sending a very strong deterrence is also equally important. When we can detect a cyber attack that's coming, have the ability to be able to shut it down before it comes, that's equally important. We didn't have that authority before. And the reason I mention this is so that these authorities and that we have in place could be understood, but not by all parliamentarians, but also future governments as well. Because we had tremendous capability before, and the cyber attack that we had with the NRC, because we did not have key authorities, we weren't able to respond with the capabilities because we didn't have those authorities. And that's why the authorities are very important as we discuss this. Shelley, if you want to add, can you add anything further to that, please?
Sure, Minister, just to reinforce, we have both a foreign intelligence mandate as well as a cyber defense mandate. So we do have the capability of monitoring.
It's not the mandate I'm concerned about or the authorities either. It's capability here. You know, we do see these things going on in other places. We actually, you know, we've seen recent examples of them, allegedly from China or potentially from Israel or somewhere else. So it's a question of whether Canada has those
Mr.
authorities.
Harris. Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. Thank you, and your time's up. We'll go on now to Mr. Williamson for 5 minutes. Mr. Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Defense Minister, for joining us this evening. Could you tell us, what do you think of the Halifax International Security Forum?
In what way, Mr. Chair? Can you elaborate?
What's your views? I mean, you've co-hosted it last couple of years. You've attended it many times. Is it an organization that Canada and Canadian taxpayers derive a benefit from? Is it a useful agency?
So I'm glad you asked that question there. In fact, I can give you the answer for it. So I want to make sure you're talking about the International Halifax Security Forum, not their office that they have in Washington.
Talking about the event in Halifax every year.
Good. So just the event itself, not the office and not the employees or former Conservative staffers that actually work in that office. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. So the Halifax International Security Forum, even before I was minister, when I used to watch that forum, I felt that it actually provided a very unique conversation. Probably a very intimate conversation that you could not have parts of the world. And I've said this publicly a number of times. So when I actually was able to take part in it for the first time, I actually had the former Minister of Defense, Peter MacKay, there, and told him how much I really valued the work that they do. And more importantly, it provides a really good economic benefit for Halifax itself. In fact, I actually had spoken with Peter Van Prague and some of our people is, how do we look at expanding it so that maybe the Atlantic Canada can benefit even more? So yes, it provides a really good, and we always wanted to look at opportunities and how it can be better for Halifax every single year.
So it's not something you'd want to see leave Halifax or Canada.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm really mindful. So why are you asking those questions?
I'm just getting your sense. I mean, I assume if it's important and you got so much.
I just told you right now how I felt about it. I think I kind of give a stronger endorsement for the Halifax International Security Forum as it happens in Halifax.
But as defense minister, you'd rather go to the meetings there than over in London or elsewhere. It's
No, you actually do need to go to other meetings and other
I realize
places.
that.
Halifax is important, as Mr. Bazan also knows, has actually attended the Shangri-La Dialogue.
Okay, fair enough. So let me, you kind of hinted at this.
It's very important to attend those as meetings as well.
I'm surprised you kind of referenced the Washington office and the supposed conservative staff, which kind of opens up something I'd heard around this town, that it's in fact an open secret that your government doesn't like the fact that it was started under a conservative government. It's an open secret that you'd like to find a way to defunding it. And in fact, this award that is being proposed potentially, or apparently from the news reports, the John McCain Award to the president, the heroic president of Taiwan, gives you an excuse to do just that, to cut its funding, while maintaining your close relations with Beijing. What say you to that, since you're so quick to label these conservative organizers or employees? I didn't know that was an issue.
Mr. Chair, I actually couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, actually, when Peter McRae was there, I actually said to him in front of everybody is that how important this was, and that I'm going to make sure that this continues. If you actually recall, if you want to take a look at where the once you look at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation and the report that they put out in the news release that talks about this. So what I want to make sure is that Canadian tax dollars goes to the Halifax International Security Forum, because at the same time, because when you were talking about that, the same organization, the business side of it, is headquartered in Washington. So I had to make sure that when you're asking me that question, I don't know what exactly you're talking about. I support the Halifax International Security Forum. I don't know what's so funny about this. Because it's extremely serious. Because one, this provides a lot of economic benefit. We invite people from all over.
So based on this strong support and your support for the group in Halifax, can you commit to us today that regardless of what award is presented or not presented at its next meeting, the funding you'll continue to fund this organization?
Mr. Chair, why are you concerned? I thought we were talking about Canada-China relationship. I've stated when the funding request comes to me, as it does every year, I will take a look at it. I've given my public endorsement for the International Halifax Security, the forum itself, so often. And I'm kind of surprised why you keep going on about the support for this. And the reason I asked this question is because the company is actually headquartered in Washington. And I want to make sure...
Minister, read the newspaper then.
Read the newspaper. Order. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll now go on to Ms. Yip for 5 minutes. Ms. Yip, please.
Thank you, Minister Sajjan, for coming. And going back to our topic for this evening, Minister, with COVID, it's brought about many obstacles. I was wondering if you could tell us more about how we've managed to sustain our engagement in the Indo-Pacific region.
Thank you very much for the question. And I'm glad we can get back to the topic at hand here, because Canada is a Pacific nation. And when I became Minister of National Defense, it was very clear that we did not have a significant presence in the Pacific. In fact, it was actually quite consistent that we didn't have a presence at the Shangri-La Dialogue regularly. And one thing that we committed to, so not only increasing our presence with the military, being there reliably on exercises, working very closely with our partners. In fact, the perfect example that we can give is what we call Operation NEA, is the sanctions monitoring against North Korea, where in Vancouver here, there was a conversation that was convened by the foreign ministers, led then by Minister Chrystia Freeland, with other foreign ministers and the Secretary of State. Myself and the Secretary of Defense from the U.S. also attended, provided a military outlook. Through this, what we were able to do with all the foreign ministers is look at the challenges, look at the military challenges as well, but also to emphasize the importance of diplomacy. But to do this, we needed to have credible military presence in the region against North Korea. And that's exactly what we did. So through that convening of that conversation, we were able to have a greater presence in the region. Now, consistently provided both aerial and ship support for monitoring of these sanctions. And what this does for the region is give greater confidence to the members, nations there, that Canada will be there. And that's exactly what we have done. And we need to continue this because we do have significant security concerns in the region. But if we also want to have a voice, we need to be there. And that's exactly what we're doing now.
So in your opening statement, you mentioned that you were looking to expand your Navy ties, which you've just mentioned, and also that would include military education with other countries. Can you tell us more about that?
No, thank you. The relationships, we have a military training cooperation program where we
I'm afraid we lost the minister
once, but we seem to have lost him. There he is.
Well. Sorry.
Sorry, Minister, we lost you for a few seconds. Would you repeat the answer, please?
Sure. I was talking about the military training cooperation program that we have in the region, and we've been trying to enhance that. So that their members can actually train with us at our school here in Canada. Obviously, this has been impacted by COVID, and we look forward to resuming a lot of that. But we also do capacity building work. And what we want to do is now look at opportunities and how we can increase the relationship to start working on cooperation of humanitarian and disaster response, because we know how much that impacts the region and how we can actually provide greater support when we work together.
Thank you. What has D&D's involvement been in protecting Canadians against cybersecurity interference like Operation Fox Hunt to suppress dissent among the Chinese Canadian community?
Well, one thing I can give absolute confidence is that our folks at CSE work very closely with our allies in protecting Canadians and plus our allies as well. It comes to any intrusion. There's a lot of great work that happens behind the scenes for good reason that we can't talk about with Canadians. But the CSE Act, and as much as I've already talked about the authorities, it is important that we do mention that the authorities that we finally have actually allows us those capabilities. But what those capabilities require the appropriate investments that we are currently making. For example, the creation of the Cyber Center. That not only allows us to be able to have a tremendous capability to protect Canadians, but also allows us to start building a culture of resilience inside Canada so that we can make sure everybody is cyber safe. And as little as this may sound, it has a significant impact where you can work with small businesses and even individuals. So making sure that cyber safe, everybody's walking around with the phones, even kids these days. But educating them on how to change their password regularly, to make other choices to making sure that they stay safe is extremely important.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you, Ms. Zan, and thank you, Mr. Minister. That concludes our first panel, first session. I understand your team or some of the folks with you are staying for the next panel. But we need to suspend for 2 minutes so we can add 2 additional witnesses. So we'll suspend for 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
to additional witnesses. From the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, we have Danielle Costello, Assistant Deputy Minister, International Security, as well as Weldon Epp, Director General, North Asia and Oceania Bureau. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll now continue with questions from committee members, and we'll go first to Mr. Bazan for 6 minutes. Mr. Bazan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to concentrate my questions to Jody Thomas, the Deputy Minister of National Defense. Ms. Thomas, when the Department of National Defense canceled the winter warfare training exercise with the People's Liberation Army, we read about some pushback that D&D received from officials over foreign affairs. Can you describe what that pushback was?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. As was shown in the inadvertent release of the email, there was some concern about breaking existing agreements, and there was concern about commitments that had been publicly made. Five Eyes Chiefs of Defense had decided that this kind of winter warfare training, and it was winter survival training rather than warfare training, was probably not the best use of our allied time, and that we thought it was possibly a risk to continue with that training. And so it was a difference of opinion amongst professionals resolved with the cancellation of the training.
So, Ms. Thomas, we know from those 8 tipped documents that our Five Eye partners, particularly the Australians and the Americans, warned the department that sensitive military doctrine risked being transferred to the communist Chinese troops if we went ahead with the winter warfare exercise. So can you please explain what type of sensitive transfer of military doctrine was at risk, and why would that be considered so dangerous?
Well, I could ask Major General Cadu to expand upon the exact training, in that it was a military training program. I think that any transfer of knowledge that allows another country that is not an ally and not necessarily of the same view of us as that we have of the world to expand their body of knowledge is always a risk. So whether it is how to operate a vessel, how to operate and survive in the winter, any number of activities that are undertaken by a military, it was determined that the best approach was to not proceed with the training.
Now, you just said a month ago, on March the 10th, that that China has, and I'll quote you, and was regarding China's interest, has a ferocious appetite, and will stop at nothing to feed itself. And the Arctic is the last main regions left, and we have to understand it and exploit it more quickly than they can exploit it. So, given the reality of China's ambitions in the Arctic, and knowing, how your mindset is now, what changed since having them here in 2018 and in winter warfare and winter survival alongside members of the Canadian Armed Forces?
Thank you very much for the question. The training that was conducted and planned to be conducted in 2018 was very low-level training. The difference between the strategic view of China and the Arctic and what Canada needs to do to protect our interests in the Arctic and our sovereignty, I would say, are two completely different issues. One is about a very tactical level training, and the other is about our sovereignty and a strategic level view of Canada, our waters, our domain, our maritime domain approaches, and the Arctic as an entire region.
Has the decision been taken now to halt these exercises indefinitely, or was the decision made to permanently ensure that we do not go forward with any more training with Chinese troops?
My understanding is there will not be this kind of training.
So after the documents were released under access to information, what message did your department receive from Chinese officials in Beijing?
I don't know of any message to the Department of National Defense at that time.
Was there any to the Canadian Armed Forces?
Not that I am aware of.
So there was no pressure from the Chinese Communist regime in Beijing to continue on with the training at some future date?
No, sir, there was not.
So it seems we have two departments here working at cross purposes. On one hand, the Liberal government signed an agreement to work more closely with China's military, including more military exercises on our soil. And that was backed strongly by members of the Foreign Affairs Department. And on the other hand, we have military leaders putting on the brakes on this idea for national security reasons, especially from our Five Eye partners, and having to fend off pushback from foreign affairs. So what is national defense doing to ensure our national security is not compromised by the communist regime in Beijing while the Liberal government is complicit in enabling it and trying to appease the dictators in Beijing?
The Canadian Armed Forces is executing the policy, strong, secure, and engaged. Our presence in the Indo-Pacific is a persistent presence. We are very active members on operations like OPNIOM, which is the sanctions enforcement. And we are certainly aggressively pursuing a range of activity, options, and investments for NORAD modernization and continental defense.
How am I doing for time, Mr. Chair?
25 seconds.
So I'll just raise a question directly to officials from Foreign Affairs that in the unredacted documents that were aid-tipped, we read some pushback from your officials on the Chief of Defense Staff's decision to cancel winter warfare training with the Communist Chinese People Liberation Army. So why does your minister continue to insist that diplomatic relations should trump national security?
I'm afraid that's your 6 minutes, Mr. Bazan. We'll have to wait for an answer to that, perhaps at another questioner. And now we'll go on to Mr. Fragiskatis for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to officials for appearing tonight. My question goes to Ms. Thomas to begin with. Ms. Thomas, obviously, I think anyone who looks at Canada-China relations recognizes the importance of multilateralism. I'm wondering if you could shed some more light on exactly on the issue of multilateralism. Is it the Five Eyes allies that is the most important avenue through which we respond to China, or other partnerships and relationships that you would point to that are critical? I'm not asking you to rank, but I think it's important for us as a committee to recognize from a defense perspective, where exactly is the energy focused? Is it focused through the Five Eyes allies or other relationships?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. Certainly, Canada's primordial defense relationship is NATO, but it is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO has an interest in China. There's absolutely no doubt. But the majority of our exercising in the NATO environment, which I would invite either of the military members to comment on, is focused on the Atlantic and the North Atlantic. The Five Eyes partnership certainly is very important for us in the Indo-Pacific. We have other alliances. The minister has been asked to join ADMM Plus, the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus that focuses on the Indo-Pacific as an observer this year. That's been a critical move forward, as was mentioned earlier. The partnerships provide different strengths and benefits depending on the activity and the geographic nature of the world. Of course, we share a NATO relationship with two of the Five Eyes, and there is a Indo-Pacific interest with all of the Five Eyes. So our activities are always in a coalition. We are a country that believes in multilateralism, and we rely on and work with our allies for all the activities that the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces undertake. I don't think there's a ranking or a difference. It depends on the focus and the need.
Thank you. Can you share anything, and I know you might be limited in what you can say here, but I still think it's an important question. The Quad. I know there's some media focus on this recently, whether or not Canada would work with the entity that's emerged now known as the Quad to deal with China. Anything that you can elaborate on there?
Canada is not currently a member of the Quad. I would invite that question to go to Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Costello or Mr. Epp?
Sure, I'm glad to speak to that. Thank you. the Quad is an informal consultation group, and we have great relations with every member of it. And we look to cooperate with each member of it, and it's something that is increasingly important in regard to the new strategic environment we're seeing in the Indo-Pacific, which is something that's going to be of greater and greater interest. And so, as the Deputy Minister was saying, our partnerships in the region are really important to us, and they're growing.
Thank you. I'll stick with foreign affairs with my last question, Mr. Chair. We've seen the federal government take steps in recent months to ensure as much as possible that any products sourced from the Xinjiang region of China that may have had as their source forced labor are not allowed to enter Canada. However, it is unfortunately still the case that websites like eBay, like Amazon.ca, and I just saw it myself tonight on Amazon.ca, advertise Xinjiang cotton. And for those who might not know, Xinjiang cotton is a major source of the global cotton supply. What can the Canadian government do further to what it's already done? And I think important steps have been taken, but I think there's clearly a call here to do even more to ensure that products and or services that are the result of forced labor do not end up coming into Canada, period. Is there, and I know you might pivot now to talk about employment and social development Canada and how it's their responsibility, and public safety has a role. I get that. I get that there's various departments working on this, but can foreign affairs also be involved in looking at this? Is this happening? To what extent are you coordinating with other departments on this matter? I think it's a very critical issue facing the country right now.
Best, but I will just say, as I do, that the situation in Xinjiang is concerned us, and we're working very closely with allies on these issues, which is what you saw in our approach jointly on sanctions. But Weldon, perhaps you could take the question.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. I want to just echo Dan's comments as well. I mean, we are deeply, deeply disturbed by developments in Xinjiang. They're not new, they've been ongoing, but the more information that comes to light, the more we are refining the advice that we've provided to government. To your specific question, it's an excellent point that we're, as you can imagine, well aware of. I think the government took and was very clear that it took a first step earlier in January, and we're exploring with other departments.
Thank you, Mr. Epps. Sorry to cut you off, but Mr. Prajascalis' time is up. Et maintenant, on continuera avec Monsieur Bergeron pendant 6 minutes. Monsieur Bergeron.
And now we have Mr. Bergeron for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. And thank you to our new witnesses for having joined us at such a late hour. To begin with, let me just go back to the information that was published in the media recently to the effect that Global Affairs would like to, or wished to, continue the People's Liberation Army joint exercise on Canadian soil. So what led Global Affairs to want to do that?
Désolé.
Very sorry. I wasn't in Ottawa then, but I would be pleased to give you an answer speaking for the minister, given that I'm in good contact with my colleagues. If I understand correctly, it was very shortly after our two Michaels were detained. We were very concerned about the situation. We hadn't yet completely evaluated the situation in depth and did not fully understand the intentions at that time of the Chinese authorities. That's why we wished to examine everything that was a channel of engagement in order to be able to dialogue across the board. After the situation escalated, once the two Michaels were arbitrarily arrested, we went into a period of ongoing evaluation. You may know the expression, we didn't want to escalate matters, nor did we wish to back off or back down. So that's what was going on. We were undertaking full evaluations in order to better understand the situation and hopefully work to free the two Michaels via dialogue. Thank you for such a frank and open answer. Would we be right to say that now you agree with the Minister of Defence's decision to put an end to that exercise? I'm very sorry. I was on mute again. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Our relationship with China has changed a good deal. It's not the same country that we were working with even a few years ago. Repression has increased. China is more aggressive on the international stage. So our relationships have changed likewise. Now we clearly see that those channels, those means of dialogue did not allow us to free the two Michaels. It's a new context, a very difficult and complex and difficult relationship that we need to adapt to. Thank you very much. You probably followed this committee's work in particular regarding contracts that were given out without much security checks, contracts for managing visas in the People's Republic of China given to a company held by a Chinese conglomerate that outsourced to another company which was a Chinese state enterprise without state-owned enterprise without much check. Now, I would like to go to the project that the minister had to put in an order at Nortec to equip 175 embassies. Given that the company was founded by the son of the prior Secretary General of the People's Republic of China, Hu Jintao, and given that a number of concerns were expressed regarding corruption in the company, in Namibia, for example, and concerns that were expressed by the government of the United States, for example. So, were security checks carried out before we got into a project of this nature? If I understand correctly, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Department of Foreign Affairs, never ordered the equipment. It was a standing offer. Was indeed offered to the company following a process undertaken by Public Services Canada, but it was never used. It was never drawn on. If I understand correctly as well, I'm not in charge, of course, that part of the department. An independent study was carried out and shared with another House of Commons committee. But all said and done, we neither purchased nor deployed that equipment in our embassies. You've referred to the study, the analysis carried out by Deloitte. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Champagne, at the time when he appeared before the Foreign Affairs Committee, did indeed tell us that that company had carried out a study, an analysis. From what I understand, you're telling us that the recommendation based on that study was negative. If I understand correctly, the report has been shared with the committee, yes? The Procedures Committee, yes? My colleagues may confirm. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Bergeon's time is up.
6 minutes. Mr. Harris, please.
Thank you. If I may follow on along Mr. Bergeron's question here, the recommendation from Deloitte was that security subject matter experts in the department and consultations be undertaken to do the assessment of the requirements regarding security. So
Mr. Harris, can you turn your camera on, please? Sorry.
Oh, I'm very sorry. Yes, sorry. Yes, the follow-up. I don't know if I lost time on that. If I had to repeat myself for just
we heard you.
You heard me. Good. Well, that's great. One of the recommendations was security subject matter experts be consulted. And the question that I have is, either the security communication security establishment or anyone else regarding the new tech contract that Mr. Bergeron referred to? And if not, why not?
Again, I'm not the expert in this area. I think this is a different the corporate services part of it.
Maybe CSE can tell us.
My understanding, if I may, though, is that this was a standing offer process that was awarded by Public Services and Procurement Canada that was never used by Global Affairs Canada.
No, I understand that. I'm interested in the procedures, whether you followed that advice, whether you use CSE or not, or whether you just ignore these suggestions by Deloitte, who was asked to investigate into it.
I can assure you we don't ignore it, but if you want to hear from my colleague at CSE, I cede the floor.
Now, the question is whether or not.
Mr. Chair, shall I answer the question?
Yes, please. Just yes or no. If you don't know, tell us you don't know.
Well, I think that, from a CSE perspective, we provide advice and guidance on a wide range of issues.
When you're asked, were you asked in this case?
I will defer to my colleague, Scott Jones, who's the head of the Cyber Center and responsible for supply chain assessments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when this issue came to light, we work with Global Affairs, but in this case, I'm going to have to get back to you just to confirm exactly when that happened, because I think you're asking about a specific time, and I just want to make sure I give you an accurate answer.
That'd be great. I'd rather do that than to take up the time saying nothing. Thank you very much. There was and this may involve you, Mr. Jones. Microsoft in March of this year announced that there was multiple malicious actors compromising their Exchange email service, and they blamed it on a group that they called Hafnium, who they said was associated with China and then believed sponsored by the. You issued a report, or your organization did, on the 6th of March, the next day, warning Canadians, or giving them alert to apply their patches and look for signs of compromise. Was CSE and your center independently aware of that attack, and what kind of response would Canadians be able to expect regarding this kind of attack?
Well, thank you, Mr. Harris and Mr. Chair, for the question. I think there are a few aspects of that. That specific incident was something that we call an out-of-band patch alert. So Microsoft is issuing something outside of the normal process. So normally that's called Patch Tuesday. And so that immediately draws attention. So from a cybersecurity agency perspective, our goal was to make sure that Canadians were aware and quickly responding, because that is something that is usually quite urgent. The second aspect of that is in terms of previous knowledge. There are organizations, advanced notification programs that these large companies have, but in this case, the scope and this was done quickly and released by Microsoft to respond to a very urgent threat that was faced. And so our goal here is to always get alerts out as quickly as possible so people can take action. And unfortunately, in these scenarios, the best response is to patch as quickly as possible to prevent any further exploitation.
Thank you. Thanks very much. In the departmental plans of DND, it states that CSE and the Canadian Armed Forces are working together to assume a more assertive posture in the cyber domain by conducting and supporting joint cyber operations against adversaries who wish to threaten Canada's internal affairs, defence, or security. The question that I have for you is Parliament made aware of any of all authorized military operations that entail active cyber operations, and as it is with other operations?
Thank you very much for the question. I'll be very quick. When an active cyber operation has occurred, and that's not happened very frequently, no, there's not a notification to Parliament, but in a memorandum to Cabinet authorizing an operation, if cyber effects would be used, that authorization is sought in the MC.
Has the Canadian Armed Forces undertaken active cyber operations using the authorities that it has been given?
Shelley may wish to answer that question. I think that's something we should take on notice.
Sure, I can say that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the question. I can say that under the CSE Act, we now have the authority to assist the Canadian Forces.
We've been told that. Have you ever used that authority, and have you notified Parliament of it?
As you can appreciate, I can't go into details on any of the specific or sensitive classified operations that we undertake.
So they would be clandestine operations.
Mr. Harris, that concludes your time, Mr. Harris. Thank you very much. Nous continuerons maintenant avec le deuxième tour. Mr. Paulus.
We'll now go into the second round. Mr. Paulus, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. My first question will be for Rear Admiral Bishop. I would like to know, when it comes to evaluating the threat at present over the 5 last years, can you tell us that the threat is more extreme than it was than 5 years ago, and what level is it at?
For the question, obviously, we're very interested in the development of China's military capabilities, and it's something that we watch quite closely, and we've been watching it for quite some time. I would not characterize that we're specifically concerned over the last 5 years, but looking at the broader trends of how China has evolved over the last couple of decades. And I think that causes us some concern when we look at the trajectory that it has been on. Now, if you look at China in the 1980s, large conscript military, not really capable of doing much, primarily focused on coastal defense. And that's a very different military than the one that we see today. China has made significant efforts to modernize its military force, introduce modern new capabilities, and also transform the way it commands and controls those capabilities to be a far more effective fighting force. We also see that China has expanded into new domains that we're quite interested in, including the space domain, with a significant increase in their operations in space. If you take a look at the 1980s, China didn't operate satellites. Today, they've launched over 540 satellites in space, and we're watching that very closely. So I think overall, it's the trend over the last 20, 30 years that has caused us a lot of concern. And as China has built up its military capability, we're also very interested in how it's using it. Because
Thank you, sir. I have to continue. Thanks.
Yeah.
Maintenant, Major General Cadieux.
No, Major General Cadieux, given what the Rear Admiral has just told us, does Canada have sufficient capacity to counter these threats that have changed?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. The Canadian Armed Forces in recent years has also sought to advance our capabilities across all domains, including some of the emerging domains that were just mentioned by Admiral Bishop, including cyberspace and in the information domain. Clearly, what we've seen from state actors is a concerted effort to advance their capabilities across all of those domains. And we've seen a more expeditionary posture as well moving forward in order to maintain our ability to detect, deter, and if required, defend against those threats. We're going to have to continue to develop and enhance our capabilities as well.
Merci, Général. Maintenant,
thank you, Major General. Now I would like to speak to Ms. Bruce of the Communication Security Establishment. The Minister, while he was with us, told us a good deal about C-59. I worked on it when I was working on public security, and we'd indeed increased authorities through that. But we detected a problem that wasn't solved using C-59, and that was the fact that many operations work in silos. Canadian Armed Forces, the CST, and other security and defense institutions, often there wasn't enough communication between them. Can you reassure us that right now you are working closely with our military capability?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I can assure you that we are working very closely with the military. In the C-59 legislation, there was a new part of our assistance mandate that opened up our capabilities and allowed us to use them in concert with CAF and DND's authorities. So this is a new place where we can come together and work more effectively together.
Dernière question.
Final question. Thank you, Ms. Brisk. Now, the threat about the 5G and Huawei, I'm sorry, I did not hear the end of the question.
Maintenant, on continue avec M. Dubourg pendant 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, étant donné que c'est ma première intervention ce soir, donc permettez que je salue tous les témoins et les remercier aussi de leur présence ici. Il y a plusieurs que j'ai déjà croisés et discutés à d'autres occasions. Donc, merci d'être là. Et ma première question, je voudrais l'adresser à Madame Bruce du Centre de sécurité technologique. J'aimerais savoir, étant donné la situation de la COVID présentement,
I would like to know, given COVID at present, what are the main issues that the CSE is working on? I know that among your strategies, you certainly can't discuss things that are classified, but I would like to know what overall issues you're working on in general.
Je vous remercie de la...
Thank you very much for your question.
CSE is really very attentive to the fact that more and more Canadians are online, Canadian citizens, but also businesses and students and the academic sector. So we are taking very strong actions to make sure that we can help educate and keep that increased threat surface more secure for Canadians. So we've been detecting phishing campaigns that have been used by non-state actors that are aiming to defraud Canadians or to steal their information and to play on their anxieties. And we've put in place a number of activities to help reduce the risk. For example, when we identify sites that are purporting to be Government of Canada authoritative sources, we work with the private sector to take those sites offline and reduce the risks of Canadians coming into contact with misinformation or disinformation. We also have been working with different partners in the government to find ways to help eliminate the option of having eliminate the idea that their accounts can be spoofed. We are providing our threat feeds to other private sector organizations that allow them to build apps that Canadians can download. We're also working extremely closely with the health sector, and we have provided to them a great number of indicators of compromise and advice and guidance that can help them withstand and be more resilient in the face of the kinds of attacks that we're seeing, like ransomware, directed at those organizations that simply can't afford to go offline for any length of time.
Merci beaucoup. Et
Thank you so much. Now, in the context of the Canada-China relations, your contact with the Five Eyes, can you tell us whether you're in closer contact with them, or are we just maintaining the same level of contact?
Encore une fois, merci de la question.
Once again, thank you for your question.
Mr. Chair, had a very close working relationship with the Five Eyes, as was described by the minister, on both the foreign intelligence side and on the cybersecurity side. We have a very strong rapport and exchange of information on all levels of activity, whether it's in research and development, all the way through to intelligence and technical exchange. So I would say the relationship is as strong as it has ever been, and we're actually celebrating our 75th anniversary this year, and some of those relationships date back all the way to the beginning of our existence. So it's a long history and a very solid relationship.
merci. Peut-être une question.
Thank you. Perhaps one brief question, Chair, for Mr. Jones. I know that he's an expert in cybersecurity. I would like to know, over the last year, have any cyber attacks come in totally unexpected, cyber attacks that you had no knowledge of, but that you did intervene to protect Canada from?
Thank you for the question. It's the one thing with cybersecurity is that it's a constantly changing environment, and I would say this last year we've seen a large number of changes in the environment, and some of the things, the SolarWinds incident, for example, and also product vulnerabilities have been coming out fast. That is something that is, on one hand, every vulnerability that's found is a vulnerability that's no longer available to an adversary in the future, but it does prompt a cybersecurity response. And so the key issues that we've been working on is how to be able to respond quickly when those come out, but also work with partners, whether that be in the health sector, to strengthen it long term.
Sorry, Mr. Jones. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Dubourg. Merci. Et maintenant, on continue.
And now we will continue with Mr. Bergeron. You have 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you, Chair. During the G7 summit that took place in Charlevoix in 2018, it was decided that Canada would coordinate the rapid response mechanism for the G7. And meanwhile, in 2021-22, Global Affairs Canada decided that it would coordinate, and I quote, interventions to protect national security, covering criminality and international crime, and arms proliferation as well, and local crises. Could you tell us what this rapid response mechanism is actually all about? And if it's set up, does it really allow us and allow the G7 to respond to all these threats that have been signed on to since 2021-2022, according to the departmental plan? I think that's a question for me, given that it relates to my responsibilities at Foreign Affairs. Thank you for the question. Yes, it's something that we have set up. We've had a good deal of success with it, and we'd like to continue strengthening this type of response mechanism. It's important to do so, given the amount of disinformation and sharp power tactics of our adversaries that are evolving rapidly and becoming very complex. The mechanism consists of a network of G7 partners and other partners, an internal expert network as well, intergovernmental and within the government. We work together to improve our capacity to better understand as well and better counter the foreign interference. Sometimes we're able to work with allies to respond together. This is certainly a program that's much appreciated by our allies, who applaud our efforts to improve our capacity and better understand everything that's going on in the digital space. Thank you. 7 seconds. Chair, very briefly then. I simply want to say that according to Mr. Costello, in 2018, there had been insufficient evaluation of the changes that the People's Republic of China was going through. So how can we coordinate this new mechanism if we're not able to well understand what's going on internationally? Very well. That certainly took more than 7 seconds, but we do thank you. Oh, thank you for your being so generous.
Thank you for 2.5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for, I think maybe Mr. Epp could answer that in his capacity as the Director General of North Asian and Oceanic Bureau. There's a concern recently, and for some time, of course, generally speaking, about the People's Republic of China's intentions toward Taiwan. Lately, there seems to be some what might be called saber rattling. How realistic is it that China could consider even something as drastic as an invasion of Taiwan, and what would be the consequences for such an action for Canada and the rest of us in the world?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. I think this, this is an issue that the Government of Canada has been consistent in conveying to both sides of the Taiwan Strait that whatever the differences and the different perspectives, that any solution to the tensions across the strait need to be a solution that receives the support of people on both sides of the strait. What's seen in recent months is quite concerning, and we have on all opportunities raised our concerns with the increase in kinetic activity that pushes the boundaries of the current status quo across the Taiwan Strait. And to the question, I mean, it's a speculative question, and you'll appreciate I'm not going to speculate on the consequences of a hypothetical, but it's not only of grave concern to Canada, but to and like-minded, but to many of our partners in the region, many of the neighbors, that both the PRC and countries like Canada around the world look at dialogue and opportunities to encourage both sides of the strait to seek a peaceful resolution to their longstanding issue. Canada will continue to speak out for inclusion of Taiwan in international fora where statehood is not an issue and where all people should be represented, and the government has been very clear on that with respect to the WHO, with respect to ICAO and other fora. I think it's very important under the kind of scenario that we're seeing where limits are being tested that we continue to make it clear, both to the people of Taiwan and the people of China, that again, any resolution to the tensions in the strait have to be through peaceful means.
Sorry. Thank you very much. That concludes the time for Mr. Harris. And we'll now go on to Mr. Chong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are for Mr. Epp. Just following up on his most recent response. Are you saying, Mr. Epp, that the Government of Canada's position is that Taiwan should participate at next month's World Health Assembly meeting?
So thank you for that question. I think Canada has consistently called for the opportunity for Taiwan to be an observer at in meetings in such as the WHA, where global commons issues are discussed. Yes.
Thank you. The government updated the travel advisory for China on Sunday with some pretty serious warnings about visiting Xinjiang. The department warned that Canadians with familial or ethnic ties to the region could be at risk of arbitrary detention. Would you advise Canadians with ties to Xinjiang against attending the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing?
So listen, Mr. Chair, I want to be clear. I'm not going to go beyond the language in the travel advisory. I think that language is quite clear. But to the question about the Olympics, I would just say this is an important question. I appreciate it. And I would say that there are very active discussions underway currently interdepartmentally, as you can imagine, as well as with our close partners, because I think we need to look at the kind of behavior we have seen from China, unfortunately, behavior which we've called out, arbitrary detentions of our citizens, and treatment of Canadian citizens who may or may not be but are treated by the Chinese differently. That's the reason for the updated warning, and that's the reason why we're going to be looking at all situations around the Olympics very closely. Thank you.
Thank you for the answer. Is Ambassador Barton back in China?
No.
No, he's still in
the
Canada?
ambassador is not in China at the moment.
Okay. He was recalled to Canada and went through a hotel quarantine because there was something sufficiently compelling him to come back to Canada during this crisis in relation and during the two trials of Mr. Kovrig and Mr. Spaver. Can you tell us why he was recalled back to Canada? Sorry, not recalled, but can you tell us why he was called back to Canada?
Yes, so you're right. I mean, the ambassador was in Canada for a series of meetings. He wasn't recalled per se, but he came back to undertake a fairly intensive outreach program, which was really focused on, as you can imagine, the priority of the government with respect to China, and that's to seek the earliest possible release for Mr. Kovig and Mr. Spaver. I won't speak to the details of his program or his discussions, but I'm happy to say that was the focus of a very, very extensive program that he undertook in Ottawa.
Okay, thank you. I have one final comment and question. Mr. Epp, it could be argued that the only thing we provide China is about 0.5% of their economic output, about 0.4% of their GDP. In other words, we purchase about $70 billion a year worth of products from China. Per capita GDP in Canadian dollars is about $10,000 a year. In other words, our 70 billion employs about 7 million Chinese workers. We know that 20 million people a year are moving from China's rural areas into cities, a phenomenon that has been going on for more than a decade and is predicted to go on for some time in the future, something confirmed by the Chinese Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development. Has Global Affairs done an analysis of this phenomenon related to the existential need for China to grow at a certain rate, GDP currently, to ensure that internal migrants are gainfully employed? And if so, what can you tell us about the conclusions of this analysis?
So, Mr. Chairman, it's a very specific question. I will say off the top of my head, I'm not aware that such a study has been done, but, we're a large department and I would be happy to look into it and let you know if we have. I think more generally, the point's an important point. It plays to a number of concerns, both with respect to social cohesion and stability in China. I think as others have said, I think including Minister Champagne when he's before the committee in January, I mean, China has in many ways some fragility. And a lot of that fragility has to do with the large gap in incomes. Even as China has developed and grown richer, it's also seen a much greater income gap. And that disparity between urban centers and rural, I think is well known to many of the members of this committee who've traveled to China and been briefed on that before. In the mix, there's also been, as urbanization has rapidly accelerated in China, it's created other issues beyond social and political, including environmental. But it's also offered opportunities for Canadian exporters in areas where Canada is highly sought by Chinese consumers, whether with respect to our products or our homes, building, construction, et cetera.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chong. And now we'll go to Ms. Yip for 5 minutes.
Thank you to all the witnesses who are continuing to stay so late to answer our questions. My first question is to Ms. Thomas. In a Globe and Mail article published earlier last month, you suggested we can deploy warships to the South China Sea in an effort to send a message to China that we will not be bullied into changing the geography of the world. Does Canada have any allies currently doing this, and is there room for collaboration there?
The approach of Canada and our allies to the South China Sea is very consistent. All of our Five Eyes allies use the same approach, and they see the South China Sea and the Straits of Taiwan as free and open areas to navigate through. And so I would say that our approach is absolutely consistent with allies.
Thank you. My next question is to CSE. On March 24th, CBC News reported that Facebook's announcement that members of Canada's Uyghur community were being targeted in a cyber espionage campaign. And Facebook has managed to trace it to 2 companies in China, reportedly attempts to infect devices with malware to permit surveillance. Has there been an increase in cyber attacks traceable to Chinese entities since the House voted to qualify China's action in Xinjiang as a genocide?
Thank you very much for the question. I would say, first of all, that we were very pleased to hear the reports of Facebook disrupting the campaigns that were directed against the Uyghurs around the world, including in Canada. It's important to note that CSE does not have a mandate to direct any of its activities at entities in Canada. So we're a foreign intelligence agency, and that prohibits. But when we do detect information or indications that foreign actors are targeting individuals in Canada, we can work with our domestic partners to ensure that they have that information and can take action. So I can't speak specifically about sensitive techniques or methods or intelligence activities that we've undertaken, but can assure you that when we do see activities directed at Canadians, we do take action with through our partners.
So, Facebook and other social media platforms, do they alert CSE at the same time as the public then?
So it takes a very broad group of different players in the private sector and in government to monitor all of this space and work together. So Facebook plays a very specific role, and when they take down these kinds of campaigns, we learn about it usually at the same time as everybody else.
Do you have any concerns about WeChat?
CSE is not a regulator. We do not comment or endorse or ban specific technologies or specific companies, but we do publish advice which helps Canadians choose wisely and understand how an app works, where their data resides, how to turn on the security features, how to update those apps when prompted, and to delete them when they're no longer used. So we do not comment specifically on apps, but we do encourage the very safe and responsible use and best cyber hygiene.
Okay, I'm not sure if this question can be answered, but I'm going to give it a try anyways. During a pandemic, getting accurate information backed by science to Canadians is really important. Sometimes this is difficult. You have a community that perhaps doesn't speak much English or are seniors, and they are relying on foreign media for information on vaccines, and sometimes these medias, they spread misinformation and cause vaccine hesitancy. In particular, I've heard that some of the Chinese cable networks have been doing that, and it's alleged that the Chinese government has a stake in those cable networks. What can we do to limit this type of telecommunications interference or misinformation campaign?
Thank you for the question. I'll assume that's directed at me unless somebody else wants to weigh in. I can't really speak to the specifics of your question, but I can confirm that disinformation and misinformation are very serious matters, and we are looking at them very carefully.
Thank you, Ms. Yip. This will conclude our second panel. And as promised before the meeting started to my colleagues, I'll now suspend for 5 minutes for a health break. I think that would be appreciated. And we'll come back and we'll thank the witnesses and let you go. And we'll come back for our business meeting. So I'll see you in 5 minutes. Thank you very much. issue to deal with is to let you know about the motion for the production of documents. The clerk would like to confirm one aspect of the motion that was adopted on Wednesday, March 31, 2021. As the deadline for the production of documents was changed to 20 days, the deadline for Mr. Stewart and Mr. Polican to appear, should they fail to produce the documents, should now be 27 days as opposed to 17 days. And so the motion would change to include the part that says within 27 days of this motion passing. Et en français, c'est-à-dire dans les 27 jours suivant l'adoption de la présente motion. And the question is, are there any objections to this? The clerk is simply looking for comment.
Y a-t-il des objections?
Seeing no objections, I'll consider that adopted. And the next item, ensuite, comme vous le savez, l'horaire du comité.
Then, as you know, the committee's schedule is changed. We're now meeting on Mondays for 3 hours, and the clerk has shared a proposed schedule reflecting this. Do we have any comments? I see no comments.
That next Monday, April 19, 2021, Ms. Bartholomew, chairperson of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, has confirmed her appearance. She's currently on a 2-witness panel. The clerk analyst would like to know if members would prefer to hear from Ms. Bartholomew for a full hour on her own. Mr. Harris. Sorry, Mr. Harris, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. So did you say next Monday, the 19th?
I think that's right. Sorry. Yeah, the 19th. That's correct. Yes.
That's the evening of the budget. We're planning to meet.
Well, that's up to the committee, of course. If the committee doesn't want to meet that night, the committee won't meet that night, but I'm in your hands. I don't see anyone else. So on that but Mr. Bergeron.
Je pense qu'il s'agit de la part de monsieur.
I think that Mr. Harris's comment is highly relevant. Of course, we could choose to meet, despite the fact that we will be hearing a speech on the budget only hours prior, probably around 4 in the afternoon. So probably at 6:30 in the evening, that will be over. Now, will committee members really want to meet despite that situation? I think we should wonder. We might decide to meet, yes.
Je sais pas,
I'm not sure. I don't want to come down in one way or another, really, but yeah, that's what we need to decide.
Mr. Harris, your hand is still up. Sorry. Mr. Jennis.
Yes, I was going to say, as eager as I am to see our first budget in 2 years, assuming it will be twice as long, I don't think it will be realistic for us to get finished reading it before the committee or even in the subsequent 24 hours. So given that the budget speech will be over, I suggest we continue on with the important work of this committee. I have no objection to the schedule as laid out.
So in terms of that, I don't think so. In terms of the question about Ms. Bartholomew, would members prefer to hear from her for a full hour on her own? And I guess I'm assuming that you would like to hear from her for a full hour on her own, unless I see indications otherwise.
On parle de qui exactement, Monsieur le Président?
So who is this exactly we're speaking of? Ms. Bartholomew, who is the chair or president of the Security Review Commission of the United States, perhaps. I'm sorry, this didn't come through.
Aucune indication. Alors, voilà. Monsieur Paulus.
Mr. Paulus, I'm trying to follow this. I have the document here. So exactly where are we? Perhaps I missed something. Perhaps the clerk could help us. Yes, of course. Thank you. So in answer to the question, please look at the 19th. We have Mr. Steve Waterhouse and then Mr. Bowe, Mr. Steve Whitehouse. Mr. Bowe preferred to have the chair of the commission, the review commission, appear rather than he. So it's the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, and there is no translation of that into French. Got it. That's what I'd missed. Thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. Mr. Lightbound. So, Mr. Chair, we need to wonder whether we're adding Ms. Bartholomew, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, but on the 19th, or do we give her an entire hour for herself? And if so, what day would that be? Would that add a day? Because right now we've got something that winds up at the end of May. When would that hour be scheduled? If I understood correctly, Ms. Bartholomew is replacing someone who is, lower down in the commission, right? Is that right, Ms. Clerk? So that person said it would be better to send the chair. So an hour for Ms. Bartholomew or Molu. Very well. Thank you, Ms. Clerk. Let's move on to the next issue. Another thing I need to mention, Mr. McGuinty, the clerk asked Mr. McGuinty to testify here before the committee, but he turned down our request. Mr. Paulus, you have your hand up? It was more like a why? Like why? Mr. McGuinty might give us an answer, at least, give us some information. Ms. Clerk, I have the impression that Mr. McGuinty said that he didn't want to testify before the committee. Is that correct? Yes, if I may. He gave no specific reason, simply that he's turned down our invitation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe the clerk can clarify the rules. My understanding is that parliamentarians have a unique privilege with respect to not appearing, even if they're asked to. Does the Intelligence Review Committee on Parliamentarians have a vice chair or a co-chair? We could invitation to the appropriate next person, since there was a desire to hear from someone from that committee.
Madame Raffier, savez-vous si c'est le cas?
Ms. Clerk, do you know if there is such a person? I am checking as we speak. I'm not sure. I could ask if someone else would like to come instead of Mr. McGuinty.
Can I go now to Mr. Lightbound or?
Yeah, so I'd like to hear back from the clerk maybe in a few minutes once we have that answer. But I think we have certain limitations when it comes to Mr. McGuinty choosing not to appear. But I think let's. It was an important perspective. The Intelligence Review Committee of Parliamentarians has tabled a public report. And I think we would like to hear about it. So, that's the context in which the request was made. And if he doesn't wish to appear, I think maybe a vice chair would be appropriate.
Okay, j'ai Monsieur Lightbound, suivi par Mr. Bergeron.
And now with Mr. Lightbound, followed by Mr. Bergeron and then Mr. Harris. Mr. Lightbound, yes, Chair. I hope not to be impertinent, but I'm just wondering, when we're dealing with committee business, usually this is behind closed doors. And is it normal that we are not now in camera? What's the situation, Ms. Clerk? Yes, both are possible, either in public or in camera. It's the committee's choice. At present, we're in public, but the members may choose otherwise. Thank you very much, Mr. Lightbound. Mr. Bergeron. Chair, I would like to hear more about this supposed privilege that parliamentarians have to turn down invitations to appear before a committee. If this privilege exists, I'd like to hear more about it. And if it doesn't exist, we need to ask whether we would like to approach Mr. McGuinty again and be a little more insistent, as we have been with former ambassadors, for example. This is a paradox to me. Here we have a parliamentary body which is trying to ensure that there's some sort of civil oversight on national security and intelligence issues, and the chair refuses to meet his counterparts or his other MPs to discuss his own work. I find this a little odd. So I wonder if we're in a position to put a bit more pressure on Mr. McGuinty, or is that simply impossible? I can tell you that Mr. Genuez is correct in saying that a member of Parliament has the privilege of not having to testify before any committee if they do not wish to. Only the House of Commons can insist on that, not a committee. So yes, he has a right to turn down our invitation.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with that observation. It's a privilege of members of Parliament not to be, I guess, cross-examined by committees or required to appear before committees. But I put my hand up for another reason. I'm not sure we clarified that after discussing that we wanted Ms. Bartholomew for an hour. I don't know where we fit that hour in, or whether that was to replace Steve Waterhouse and Alexander Bowe, or just have her another time in some other place. Was that clarified at all by the committee?
I think what the clerk indicated was that it was Mr. Bowe who she's replacing, if I'm not mistaken, because she is his superior. That he suggested we have her instead.
Yes. Decided to have him. The committee has decided, I think, to have her for an hour, and I'm just wondering where the hour is being found if we have Mr. Waterhouse as well during the same hour on the current schedule in front of us.
Let me ask the clerk just to clarify what the result of this would be.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Ms. Bartholomew could be instead of Mr. McGuinty in the third hour of April 19th, and we would choose an alternate with to go with Mr. Waterhouse.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Mr. Harris, did you wish to
Oh, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify that. That's fine.
Okay, Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Mr. Paulus.
Mr. Paulus. Thank you, Chair. So to get back to Mr. McGuinty, we've checked the rules. As chair of a committee, Mr. McGuinty tables a report, an annual report or other report about the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. And given that our committee is the Canada-China relations and that there's mention of security issues, it would be very relevant to have Mr. McGuinty come within his role of reporting to the public. I don't see why we wouldn't put pressure on him for that reason.
Oh, excusez-moi, Madame la Greffier.
I'm sorry, Ms. Clerk, would you like to explain the rules in this regard? Of course, yes, I can certainly clarify. If you go to our book on procedure for Parliament, 921 and 22.
Power to order individuals to appear. Ici, on descend un peu plus bas.
Looking a little further down.
Belonging to other Canadian legislatures, because each of these assemblies, like the House of Commons, has the parliamentary privilege of controlling the attendance of its members and any matters affecting them. Donc, absolument, donc le comité n'a pas le pouvoir
So yes, indeed, and those were at pages 981 and 82. So the committee cannot order Mr. McGuinty to appear, but merely invite him to do so.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Dennis, is your hand is still up, or is it up? I guess it's up again. So, Mr. Jennings.
It's up again. Yes. Yes, Mr. Chair. So just 2 points. First of all, I do think we should set aside the hour as planned to hear from either Mr. McGuinty or other members of that Intelligence Review Committee of Parliament. And there are other parliamentarians on that committee who may be willing to appear if Mr. McGuinty is not willing to appear voluntarily and if we're not able to find a workaround. I would maybe suggest that we send a follow-up letter to Mr. McGuinty underlining the strong desire of members of the committee to hear from him. That doesn't violate any of the rules, and at the same time extend the opportunity to the next appropriate or to other members of that committee. I also, in terms of this question of being able to summon people, further to Mr. Bergeron's comments and others, it seemed from what the clerk has said and what I've seen in other cases that the House of Commons can direct a person to appear before the committee. So it would be within the powers of the committee to, for instance, adopt a motion and refer that motion to the House, which then, if concurred in, would direct Mr. McGuinty to appear before the committee. I just want to have some clarity on the rules. So, I'd be interested in the feedback of other members. Clearly, it's not something that I can do without the support of other members. But if, Madam Clerk, if you can just clarify the formulation of that. So if the committee were to adopt a motion like that the committee direct David McGuinty to appear for 1 hour before the special committee and report this motion to the House, that motion, if concurred in, would provide the appropriate instruction. Is that correct?
Madam Clerk is nodding.
Yes, I can confirm it would be a motion that would be needed from the House.
But the procedure that I'm describing would satisfy that requirement.
Well, if the House adopted it, of course.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Who do I have next? Mr. Lightbound.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Je pense.
Mr. Lightbound, yes, thank you, Chair. I think that we needn't escalate this. We could simply send the invitation again to Mr. McGuinty, perhaps offer him another date. But given that the 19th is, right around the corner next week, I do think that we should set aside that third hour for Ms. Bartholomew so that we won't lose the time. It's an important time for us. And Mr. McGuinty, well, we could invite him again and suggest other dates that might suit him better, rather than the evening when the budget is being tabled.
And Mr. Jennings, you take your hand down, please, if you don't mind. Mr. Harris, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to speak to that suggestion of Mr. Genuis's of suggesting a motion be presented to the House. I don't think that's a very wise thing for parliamentarians to do unless there were some extreme circumstances requiring a member to appear. I mean, Mr. McGuinty is not being asked to appear on some matter that he alone has knowledge of. I mean, the committee has issued a report. The report is available. My experience with Mr. McGuinty in front of committees is that he tells you what's in the report and he doesn't tell you very much else. And he talks about the report because he appeared before the Public Safety Committee recently. And I think it'd be a bad precedent to set that we would ignore the privileges of members of the House, because these are privileges that are part of our privileges as members, and we should be very, very loath to make it a common practice or even a precedent such as this, where it doesn't appear to be crucial that Mr. McGuinty present himself to be examined by this committee on this matter. I think that would be unwise as a member of Parliament to set precedents like that. Mr. Lightbound's suggestion is fine if he wants to be asked again, or other members of the committee. If the purpose of this is to have an opportunity to talk about the report and what's in the report, that's fine. We can have it on our agenda, and someone from the committee can come and be the person who's leading us through the report or whatever. But I don't think you're going to hear anything that the committee learned through its report, other than what's in the report itself.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Bergeron.
Mr. Bergeron. Two matters, Chair. First, I think that it's, well, not as trivial as it might appear. As I said a moment ago, the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians was created to add a level of transparency and public control over matters of national security and intelligence. Therefore, it is certainly unusual that the chair of this committee refuses to be as open as we might expect him to be. Of course, I certainly understand Mr. Harris's point. I think that we do need to use due precaution before we decide to create a new precedent, which is why I think that Mr. Lightbound's suggestion is very wise, that we should once again offer Mr. McGuinty the opportunity to come and share his point of view with us here in the committee. His point of view on Canada-China relations from a national security perspective, and offer him different dates. Perhaps even, and I know this is not my colleague's preference, but perhaps offer him the opportunity of speaking in camera. But before we get to that, I think we at least need to offer him a new date. And if he still turns us down, we might consider other approaches thereafter. Thank you very much.
Dennis was next. I've been informed by the clerk that the act creating the committee in question does not provide for any vice chairs. Now, Mr. Jennings, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I agree with much of what has been said by everybody else. I did not mean by querying the procedural mechanism by which someone could be summoned before the committee. I did not mean to suggest that should necessarily be the first option. But I think since we're having this discussion in public, it's good to just acknowledge the options that the committee has available to it, and those are real procedural options. They're not inventing something that doesn't exist in the rules. There's a history. I believe it was used for a certain former NDP leader. There is a procedure by which the House can summon a person to appear before a committee, and that can happen for a member of Parliament if the House is acting as opposed to the committee. I do agree with Mr. Bergeron's point that this is a serious matter. Not because Mr. McGuinty's own conduct is in question here, of course, but because the spirit in which that oversight body was created was to be a committee of parliamentarians that would provide parliamentary review over security and intelligence activities. And so in that sense, this is information that members of that committee and that committee only can provide. It's not as if we can just substitute a different expert here, right? This is a particular body with a legislative mandate to be a connection between parliamentarians and security decision making. So I think it's important that the committee hear from members of that body and to honor the mandate of that body, that we be a little bit insistent. I support the suggestion of Mr. Lightbound to send a follow-up letter to offer some flexibility in terms of timing. I think it is perhaps still possible for the committee to meet outside of its regular time slot. I know maybe the whip's offices aren't that keen on it, but we can try to be flexible on our end to accommodate his schedule, and maybe just communicate to him the seriousness with which members of the committee are looking at this issue. And at the end of the day, that we do it doesn't have to be next week, but that we do set aside an hour to hear about the work of that committee. If not from Mr. McGuinty, then from other members of the committee. Theoretically, I suppose we could extend an open invitation for members of the committee to appear, whichever ones wish to. It would, I think, be more orderly to hear from the chair. So I hope we're able to do that. But we have other options, and I do think we want to hear from and about the work of this committee in some way, shape, or form. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Jenius. Mr. Prajus-Kallas.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Lightbound provided a very reasonable path forward, and I think Mr. Harris echoed a very reasonable point of view. So in the interests of moving ahead here, Mr. Chair, because I see us going around in circles, I think you know where most committee members are, where most committee members sit on this issue. But I would add that I doubt that there's a single member of the committee that has read the annual review that was just tabled in Parliament, if I'm not mistaken, by, I think that was today. I could be wrong about that. Let's first read what the committee, the National Security Committee of Parliamentarians, looking at this, looking at issues of security rather, let's read their report, and then the committee can decide whether it's appropriate to move forward. I mean, this idea that we would just automatically summons Mr. McGuinty through Parliament is, I mean, I'm not sure what this is all about, but yeah, I think where most members of the committee sit on this, Mr. Chair, and I see it's 9 o'clock. I'm not sure if this is the last issue that we're dealing with, but we keep going around in circles.
Thank you. I can tell you Mr. Harris would tell you that it's 10:30, but he's nodding. Monsieur Dubourg.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Dubourg, thank you, Chair. Well, my good colleague, MP Prajus-Kallas, has already said in English what I intended to say. I fully agree with him. I agree with Joel Lightbound's suggestion as well. I would like to add, though, given that, we do have the option of inviting other members of the committee other than the chair. That said, based on my knowledge of the committee, I can say that the report that has been tabled today doesn't include all the information that the members of the committee are aware of. You know that all members of that committee have a high security clearance. So there are a number of things that they might be unable to comment on, analyses they may not be able to share with us when it comes to things that didn't make their way into the report. It went through the committee, and the committee saw to it that only what could be included in the report has been included in it. I can tell you that, of course, this is a committee of parliamentarians. There are MPs, senators, representing all parties in the House. And the committee has always tended to operate in a nonpartisan fashion. It would be highly surprising, of course we could put in the request, but it would be highly surprising that another member of the committee could appear before us. Knowing the nature of the committee, it would be unusual. We can certainly try. But if Mr. McGuinty does not appear before us, it would be a little unusual that any other member of that committee would. Thank you, Mr. Dubourg.
Attempting to draw the consensus of the committee, and perhaps I'll try this and see if there are objections that I've got it wrong. But is it the wish of the committee that the clerk write to Mr. McGuinty again, indicating that the committee strongly desires to have him appear before the committee, or if he's not available, another member of the committee to appear? Is that where we are? Mr. Genesis, thumbs up. Anyone else? Mr. Paulus, accept? Anyone object to that? Any concerns about that? Seeing none, I think that's what we'll do then. Okay. Thank you very much, Madame la Greffière. Vous pouvez procéder avec cela. Okay.
Ms. Clerk, you can go forward with this instruction. Now, finally, we have Mr. Bergeron, has asked me for a little time in the committee to put forward his motions. Mr. Bergeron, over to you. Thank you, Chair. I know that we have had this discussion in other committees and that a few of the colleagues in this committee have discussed it in another committee, being the Foreign Affairs Committee. These are routine motions that have been proposed by the Bloc Québécois. They're all the same. I know that a few changes have been made in other committees. And I would like to say that I am open to any suggestion to that effect, changes that could be made to these motions before we adopt them. The first, that the clerk inform every witness to appear before the committee that technical sound tests must be carried out by the House team in order to ensure that they are well connected and are using the correct equipment in order to ensure that we have the best sound quality possible. And that the chair inform the committee at the beginning of any meeting about any witness who has not been able to connect appropriately.
Merci beaucoup.
I'm so sorry. Thank you. Good. Questions and comments about this motion?
Please go ahead, Mr. Harris.
Agreed.
That was quick. I love those brief comments. Anyone else have an objection? No objections to that? In that case, cette motion est adoptée. Monsieur Bergeron.
Very well, then the motion is carried. Mr. Bergeron, please continue. Yes, Chair, that all documents presented to the committee that have not been translated by the Translation Bureau be submitted to the Translation Bureau for translation before they are sent out to members. The aim of this motion, Chair, is merely to ensure that we don't wind up with translations that would be, of an inferior quality, sometimes that might not even be understandable to us, whether they're in English or in French, and that we just ensure that all members of Parliament receive good translations. Thank you. Mr. Poilus. Thank you, Chair. I don't think any amendments have been offered regarding MP offices. That amendment was added in other committees by other committees that have adopted this motion. Personally, Chair, I have no objection to adding such an amendment, so we might consider that this is a favorable amendment and that it's quite acceptable to me.
I've got désolé. I'm very sorry about that. So I had a couple of hands up. Let me just ask, Mr. Harris's hand is up, but I was going to ask if anyone objects to that amendment being included. And now there are no hands up. Mr. Fragiskatis.
Thanks, Chair. I know that MP's offices, Mr. Bergeron was open to that in terms of the amendment. What about departments? Could we put that in there as well? To exclude departments as well.
Exclure aussi des ministères.
So would this friendly amendment also exclude departments?
Okay. Sorry for the confusion, then.
Okay.
If it was there.
Okay. C'est déjà là. Okay. Voyons. Yeah.
Okay. It seems it's already there. Mr. Lightbound. I was simply going to ask, Chair, with this friendly amendment, would it be possible for Mr. Bergeron to simply read out the wording as it stands? Because we're talking about we're including exclusions by excluding MP offices, if I've got it right. Mr. Bergeron? Yes, I'll try to read it in the manner in which I understand it. I hope I'll get it right. That all documents presented to committees that are not from a federal department or MP's office and that have not been translated by the translation office be provided to the translation office for revision before they are distributed to members. Thank you very much. So is there any objection to this motion as it has now been presented by Mr. Bergeron? Seeing no objections.
Adopted. Monsieur Bergeron, vous voulez continuer?
Mr. Bergeron, you're welcome to continue. The next motion is the one that might lead to some resistance on the part of my good friend, Mr. Harris, who has had a chance to speak to it before in another committee. That said, I do have a proposal to make that allowed for this to be carried in other committees, and that our colleagues of all political parties were able to back. So let me read the original motion, then I'll tell you what I propose as a amendment, and we'll see what the committee wishes to do. That any text amendment or sub-amendment be distributed in written form in both official languages to all committee members before the committee starts debating on them. I know that some colleagues found that this was a little restrictive, having to ensure that this be distributed in both languages even before the debate be started. So perhaps I could change that before the committee votes on the motion or amendment or sub-amendment, before the vote is called.
Yeah, I did object in another committee to the wording that was in the original motion, because we couldn't have even made the amendments that we made tonight to the previous motion without them being submitted in writing prior to the meeting. So this is a little different, but I guess it would be he's talking about substantive motions or substantive amendments, and I'm not sure what substantive means in that context. But I gather that it would make it very difficult for, or take a long time in some cases, for amendments to be moved, which happen quite often in committees, amendments to motions or spontaneous motions in some cases. Now, if what he's suggesting is that what would have to happen in any committee before the motion is voted upon, that would have to be distributed in writing in both official languages, I'm assuming that would take some time, and I'm wondering whether it's necessary to do that. What we did when we had this debate before in other committees, we suggested that from the purpose of translation, you could repeat the motion or have the clerk repeat the motion several times if necessary to ensure the full understanding of it. And I'm of the view that would normally be adequate. There may be situations where someone would be required to say, look, I want to be very sure that this motion is correct, and ask for the committee's approval to have it put in writing before it's voted on. But I don't know if it's necessary. The translation that we have, the interpreters that we have for our committee are very good. And if there's a problem with the translation, then that can be raised as a point of order or a point of privilege. So I'm not sure it's necessary, but I'll be interested in hearing what other members have to say.
Mr. Janus.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Bergeron, for raising this. I don't see this as this particular motion as so much an issue of language as it is one of the abilities of the committee to be nimble. There are times when there are issues that are raised and the committee wishes to respond to them with a substantive motion. For example, this sort of adventure we're on with the Public Health Agency of Canada, it started when, in the context of the motion of the meeting itself with the officials, I moved a motion that received unanimous support to get asked the officials to report back by that Friday. That was done unanimously, and so there was clearly no issue with it. But it was the case of us responding to live events, and therefore kind of verbally crafting motions on the fly that respond to something we're hearing from a witness. And so I think all of us have learned that it's a good practice to provide written notice whenever possible. And of course, that's required in certain situations when a motion is not related to the subject matter being discussed. But I think the practice has to be equality of languages. So if it's being stated verbally in one language, it has to be available verbally in both languages. And if it's being submitted in writing in one language and sent around, it must be then sent around in writing in both languages. So I don't see the value. I see some big risks in putting this additional stricture on the committee. And I think the focus needs to be on nimbleness and also preserving the principle of equality of languages.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Before I go to Mr. Paulus, Mr. Harris, you've got can you lower your raised hand function, please? Mr. Paulus.
Mr. Paulus. All right, I'll say pretty much the same thing as Garnet is saying. I always speak in French in all committees, and I think that this motion would make it more difficult for me to remain nimble with adding to motions and so on, counter motions. It's not a matter of language. It's just a matter of nimble work for me and pretty much for everyone. So this is why I think it's a bad idea. Thank you very much. Mr. Lightbound. I very rarely agree with my good colleague from Charlebourg, but this time I'm with him. Mr. Bergeron. Chair. Okay, I can see where we're heading. But rather than have my motion be defeated, which I think would not give the right message about the respect due to official languages, I would rather withdraw my motion for the moment in order to speak with the Whip's office to see what's been done in other committees. And therefore, what counteroffer I could bring to us here, taking into account these very relevant points that have been brought up by my good colleagues. So with your agreement, colleagues, I would like your support for my withdrawing the motion. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. So the motion is withdrawn. Mr. Dubourg, I see that your hand is up, sir. Mr. Dubourg, you're on mute, sir. I'm so sorry, Mr. Chair. All right. It happens every once in a while, doesn't it? It's been my turn this time. So I certainly support this approach. I think Mr. Bergeron has made a very good choice here. But I, too, have given notice of a motion that I would like to table. So by all means, tell me when I can do so.
Mr. Chair, you're back on mute.
Excusez-moi.
Alors,
j'allais dire juste...
I'm so sorry. I was about to say that this is the right time to see if there's any other business, any other issues that you wish to bring up. So by all means, please, Mr. Dubourg. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very well. So this is a notice of motion, and I think it's basically somewhat on the same topic, official languages. As you know, I am the chair of the Standing Committee on Official Languages. So allow me to read my motion for my peers here present, that any reference document that members share with the clerk or analysts to support committee work be shared with all committee members in both official languages. Any comments, any objections to this motion as stated? Seeing none, I consider, Mr. Genuis.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I have some questions about this motion. Any document is this designed to preclude sort of discrete or communications between members and the clerk or the chair, questions they might want to ask, those sorts of things? what kinds of documents would be referred to here? Occasionally I think it happens that members might ask a question, what problem are we trying to solve, I guess, as well? We're trying to understand.
But I can answer, Mr. Genius. Basically, it's documents that the analysts would use in the report, So if we say that document, we should take information in that and include that in the report. So I think that the analysts and those documents should be in both languages. But if you have other kind of discussions with the clerk or the analysts, that's okay.
So, Mr. Gendis, your hand raised is still up. I don't know if you.
Yeah. So, I wonder if we could just further clarify this. So, the idea is that if there are documents that are intended to be used as evidence as part of a committee study, that those should be then distributed in both languages. I think that's eminently reasonable. In fact, I would be surprised if that wasn't already the requirement. But if it's not, I wonder if that's the objective, that we could just clarify that explicitly in the motion. For instance, I might add in that. So I might revise the motion to read as follows: that any reference document that members share with the clerk of the committee or with analysts in order to facilitate the committee's work, or with the analysts for the purpose of it being entered in evidence, be distributed to all members of the committee in both official languages.
Oh, if a member gave a document to the clerk seeking to influence the writing without it being in evidence, that would be excluded. Is that right? Do I understand it correctly?
Well, I wouldn't want to create a blank. I can't imagine a situation where you would send it's routine for us to communicate with the clerk. I can't imagine a case where we would. But it's possible that in the context of that communication, we might send a reference document to the clerk that was part of that sort of intended private communication. But I think the goal here is that anything that is part of evidence for a study should obviously be to members, which I agree with. And I don't have a problem with the translation. The question is distribution. Like, are we creating an obligation on the clerk for her to, in certain cases, she's having a conversation on email with a member, and then suddenly this is triggered and she has to send it around to everybody. So I think maybe that could be clarified just in the way that I proposed, but in spirit, based on Mr. Dubourg's explanation, I'm in favor.
D'autres commentaires?
Any other comments?
I'm trying to figure out what this is really about here. I don't know. Obviously, correspondence with the clerk, if someone wants to ask a question or about something, is one thing. There was a situation a while ago where there was a document sent to the clerk for circulation that wasn't circulated, and I guess is that what we're talking about? A document about meeting schedules, or? I'm wondering whether it's related to a particular incident, Mr. Dubourg, or is it something that is kind of at large? Because you talk about some document that might facilitate the work of the committee, but it's not shared with the committee, I guess, is what you're aiming at. I don't know what questioning the goals Mr. Genuis is talking about here, but I think all offices communicate with the clerk about what happened or what might happen or that sort of thing. But I was trying to understand what happened at the last meeting or what decisions was made. But I think we're talking about something different here. And maybe you could explain a little bit more, Mr. Dubourg, what might be included in that.
Yes, avec plaisir, Mr. Harris. But I'm not talking about kind of communications or email that you could send to the clerk or to the analyst asking a specific question or on procedures or things like that. But like I said, in my official language committee, we had an article. It was only in English. And that article was so important. And we said that we should take part of that article. It was on the website to put in the report. So it's important that those kind of documents that we're going to use, we're going to refer in the report should be in both languages. So it's allowed all members to know exactly what's going on. So at that time, what we did is we sent that article to translation bureau to have a French version, so we can give it to anyone to be able to understand what's going on.
Mr. Jenis.
Mr. Dubourg, are you talking about, though, footnoting now then? Because maybe I misunderstood, but I got the impression that you were saying that we shouldn't footnote an article that's only in one language. You're not saying that. You're only saying that if you're directly quoting from an article or if you're including it in evidence. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Monsieur Paulus.
Mr. Paulus. Thank you, Chair. I think that we now have the answer. When we refer to documents in general, that's too broad. It's really an extract from a document. I take this book, let's say. If I want to work with a page of this, I'd have that page translated, not the entire book, because now you're saying document. Document can mean so many things. So part of a document that's going to be used directly in the report, that makes more sense. Mr. Bergeron. Yes, Mr. Chair. I don't know. The motion that my colleague suggests seems very clear. Here, we're speaking of reference documents. To go back to Mr. Paulus's example, let's say he likes the book that he's shown us, but he wants to refer one page of it to his colleagues for discussion purposes, to help us better understand something within our discussion. I would certainly agree that we wouldn't want to be asking people to read the entire book. But if he shares a page and the page is in French, it seems quite normal that we would have it translated into English for Anglophone colleagues. And the same with the inverse. Let's say it's an English page. We'd want it in French for our Francophone colleagues. Much as witness documents should be translated before they're distributed. So a reference document then. Of course, this isn't just any sort of document, not an email. Not all documents, not informal discussions or exchanges, simply a reference document that is actually relevant to our discussion, our work, that is guiding our discussion. It seems very clear to me that this shouldn't be distributed in solely one language. It must be distributed in both official languages. If this is a matter of substance, a substantive article published, let's say, in Le Devoir, a Montreal newspaper, then it should be translated into English before we distribute it to all colleagues, Anglophone and Francophone. Same for a substantive article that we are using that was published in the Globe and Mail. Seems obvious to me. It also seems to fall in line with the usual practices of our committee. Perhaps one little problem with our usual procedures, which speak only of documents provided by our witnesses. We base our discussions not only on those documents, but on some other documents as well, including research notes that wonderful, prepared by our library, parliamentary library, and they are distributed in both official languages. Why? Because they're important, and they help us address an issue before we make a decision about it. So these reference documents, We need something saying that they can't be given to committee members unless they're given in both official languages. Thank you very much.
Time, which of course in St. John's is 10:57.
Time to go.
Mr. Jennings.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we should be able to wrap up here quickly. I think we all now understand and agree with the intention of Mr. Dubourg. I would like to just move to amend the motion to read as follows: that any reference document that members share with the clerk of the committee or with the analysts for it to be entered into evidence as part of a study be distributed to all members of the committee in both official languages.
Madam Clerk, would you like that to be read? I'm making sure that she's reading, I think, as I watch. Madam Clerk, you have that? You have that. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Jennings. So let's go to the, is there anyone opposed to that amendment, I guess?
Just a point of order, Mr. Chair. Je suis tout à fait d'accord avec M. Bergeron, mais je pense...
I fully agree with Mr. Bergeron, but I think that even as it stands, documents must be translated into the other language before they're presented to MPs.
Yes, thank you. So my understanding of committee's work, I think it was more related to a report, to recommendations or a work plan, so that, if a member would submit to me a document that would help me organize either recommendations or a work plan, would also be distributed in both official languages. And M. Bergeron a tout à fait raison de dire que la motion...
Mr. Bergeron is quite right to say that our routine motions cover only witness documents. So this is saying that all documents used by the committee should also be in both official languages. Thank you very much.
Je vote avec M. Bergeron, alors je laisse.
I will support Mr. Bergeron. I'll be voting in line with him.
Objections to the amendment that would limit this motion to the evidence and reports, as I understand it.
Mr. Chair, I can read the amendment again. I think it's
well. I mean, what I'm trying to get at is what because it's a motion to amend, and normally, of course, you say to add the words such and such a words in such and such a place. As here, you've read the whole motion, which is helpful, of course. But
yeah, I'm
asking.
Sure, I could say it after the word analysts, it adds in the words for it to be entered into evidence as part of it, and it removes the words in order to facilitate the committee's work.
Thank you very much. So, are there any objections to this motion to amend the motion? Mr. Bergeron.
Je n'ai pas d'objection, Monsieur.
Well, I have no objection, Mr. Chair. That said, it does seem to slightly alter Mr. Dubourg's intention, inasmuch as I don't think Mr. Dubourg wanted us to refer only to reference documents, things that would be used to prepare a report, to draw up a report. I'm not going to be insisting on adopting the motion as originally presented. If Mr. Dubourg tells me that the amendment seems a friendly amendment to him, fine. But if it doesn't seem to be so, then I will support him in his opposition.
I guess what I'm looking for is whether or not we're going to have. We can certainly go to a vote, and that'll be quick. But Mr. Harris, I'll go to you first, and then I think we'll go to a vote. I'm not clear here, Mr. Harris.
I'd just like to agree with Mr. Bergeron that it does make it a different motion. But if Mr. Dubourg is happy with that, I'll go along with it. But I think, as the clerk pointed out, there are working documents that may need to be circulated as well.
Mr. Dubourg.
Well, thank you, Chair. It's just to tell the members of the committee that I'm not agree with the amendment, so I will stay with my motion. Thank you.
Okay, then I will ask the clerk to proceed with the vote.
Okay, so the vote is on the amendment of Mr. Jennings. Monsieur Dubourg.
No.
Mr. Fracascatos.
No.
Monsieur Lightbound.
No.
Miss Yip.
No, thank you.
Miss Zan.
No.
Mr. Chong,
Yes.
Mr. Jennis,
Yes.
Monsieur Paulus,
Oui.
Mr. Williamson, Monsieur Bergeron,
Non.
Mr. Harris.
No.
So, yeas pour 3, nays contre 8.
So the motion is defeated, and now we'll go on to the main motion. Is unanimous support for the? Are there those who are opposed? Would you just raise your hands? If so, we'll take a vote. Are there those opposed? Some opposed to the main motion? Seeing no one opposed to the main motion is adopted. And I suspect that members would very much like for this meeting to now conclude, it being quite late. So I thank members very much for your cooperation. Merci beaucoup. La réunion est adjournée.
Thank you. I adjourn the meeting. Good evening. Good evening. Have a good evening, everyone.